if you don't have my number, I'm not sure I can call you a friend.
The most precious and fragile thing to me.
She's quite a demanding best friend. So she really is. Yeah. That's a record scratch, by the way, when she makes that noises. It does not sound like one.
Hello and welcome to the Waterstones podcast. I'm Will Rycroft, and that very real record scratch signals the beginning of this new episode in which we'll be looking at friendship. Blood may be thicker than water, but are the friendships that we choose made of stronger stuff than we imagine? And in a literary canon bursting with fictional friendships, which books offer the very best evocation of this special bond? We'll be hearing from Waterstones Children's Book Prize winner Angie Thomas, Man Booker Prize nominee Tash Aw, and authors of The Black Girl Bible, Yomi Adegoke and Elizabeth Uviebenene. But before we hear from them, it's time to hear from my friends, Dan and Holly. Hello, pals.
Friends.
Oh!
Cold.
God, starting off friendship with a burn.
I'm gonna go.
Co-presenters.
I'm gonna go the opposite and just say, what a beautiful introduction to the episode, Will.
Dan,
Did you write that yourself?
I did write that
That's
myself.
phenomenal.
What do you
It's
mean,
so
right?
poetic.
I made it up as I went along. What can I say?
What was that line? Blood thicker than water. That's brilliant. Glorious. I'm not saying that you came up with
I
that.
definitely
I'm
cannot
just saying,
claim it. You know, blood thicker than water. I made that up.
Oh, beautiful.
In fact, is it Shakespeare? I just sort of feel like anything like that is probably
Yeah.
Shakespeare.
Rycroft.
It's Rycroft.
It's Rycroft.
From now on, it's Rycroft. So listen, everybody who heard us wittering on in our first episode last week, Beginnings, will hopefully have gathered a little bit about us as people. If you haven't heard that episode, by the way, it's called Beginnings. It seemed a very good place to start. The three of us talking to David Nichols about our beginnings in books and hearing from another couple of authors as well. You can obviously find that on your podcast platform of choice. Do check that out after you've listened to this one, of course. But I thought what we could do each week is we could all bring something to the table to start off with the episode. Now, this could be a thing. It could be an actual object, or it could just be a thing that's happened recently, or a memory, or a story, or a joke, or I don't know what. It could be anything, frankly. Who wants to go first?
I'll kick things off, I guess, for today.
Go for it.
So I have recently read a fantastic book called Expectation by Anna Hope, which has recently been published, which investigates the lives of three women, all of the same age, who used to be friends at school, living in London, but at very different stages of their lives, and really kind of examines the friendships that they have with each other, how they interact with other people in their lives. And I just absolutely loved it. And I'm going to go as far as to say that I'm going for the next Sally Rooney. I think it's fantastic. But there's a really nice, there's a really nice introductory chapter, and I just wanted to read a paragraph from that.
Straight in there.
Cool.
So the three friends have been hanging out in the park near to the house that they're all living in together. It's a bit of a rundown house, but they constantly talk about how amazing it is to be young people living in this property. They would like to pause time, just here, just now, in this park, this gorgeous afternoon light. They would like the house prices to remain affordable. They would like to smoke cigarettes and drink wine as though they're still young and they don't make any difference. They would like to burrow down, here, in the beauty of this warm May afternoon. They live in the best house, on the best park, in the best part of the city on the planet. Much of their lives is still before them. They have made mistakes, but they are not fatal. They are no longer young, but they do not feel old. They still have time to look backwards and look forwards. Life is still malleable and full of potential. The openings to the roads not taken have not yet sealed up. They still have time to become who they are going to be.
Closes book. That's a lovely opening, isn't it? That really
It's
great
fantastic.
for setting the scene.
Yes.
You are not the first person I've heard raving about this book. In fact, there's a bit of a buzz building. So yeah, that's very exciting. Dan, what have you brought with you?
I brought an anecdote and not a book. We did an event recently for Empathy Day, which is a initiative brought about by a group called Empathy Lab. They work with all sorts of authors, but they also have a strong interest in psychology and neuroscience, in examining the ways that reading develops empathy. So particularly with children's authors, this is very important. But we did an event last night with them, and the thing that came out of it was this discussion around empathy. It was with Mallory Blackman and Joseph Coelho, so it was really interesting discussion. I don't know, it felt particularly pertinent for today's episode, being on friendship, empathy being a key part of that.
It certainly is. In fact, remember that word, empathy. It will be coming back later. We're going to be talking about friendship in this episode. To get us started, I'm going to introduce Angie Thomas. So she's the author of The Hate You Give, which was, of course, the winner of the Waterstones Children's Book Prize in 2018. And that's since been adapted into an incredible film. Don't know if you've seen it. Her latest book, On the Come Up, is set in the same neighbourhood and focuses on a young rapper. And if you haven't already seen the video that I made with Angie, in which she raps, you have to go and look on our YouTube channel. It is absolutely everything you could possibly hope for from that description. Here she is on what friendship means to her.
I think friendship means love. It's another form of love. My friends, I love them, and I love that they're part of my lives, and I love that my life, and I love that they exist. So, friendship, it's a foundation too. It would be hard for me to operate in this industry if it weren't for the friends that I've made along the way who offer support and another form of community. So, friendship is definitely a big part of community too.
Do you have a sort of a tight group of friends, or do you have like a wide network of friends, or do you have both, I suppose?
I have a lot of people who think they're my friend. But I do. For me, I have a tight group, and I'm okay with that, and I like it that way because in the position I'm in, I'd never know when sometimes it's hard to recognize when someone's being genuine or not, or they're trying to get close to me because of what they think they can get out of me. But I have a tight group of friends that I don't have to worry about that with, that I don't have to talk about books with them, or movies or any of that stuff. They care, but that is not the only thing they want to discuss with me. So, but I'm friendly. I try to be friendly to every person I come across, unless they are not friendly with me. But, I always say I have tight friends with a capital F, and then friends with a lowercase f, just people that I'm friendly with and I'm okay with. But I'm like this: if you don't have my number, I'm not sure I can call you a friend.
It's interesting that thing, obviously, with the success of The Hate You Give and then it becoming a film, as you say, that the people that then come into your life, do you find yourself having to be slightly suspicious, slightly wary of, as you say, what they want from you?
Oh yeah, for sure. I look at it more so as just being protective of myself, not so much paranoid, but protective, and learning that I have to protect myself because I have my best interests at heart, and I don't know if sometimes other people who suddenly come into my life do. And so it's just a matter of figuring that out along the way. But it's just it can be a little tough, but I'm thankful that I have so many friends already that I had them before all of this. So and that makes a huge difference. But yeah, I'm always wondering, okay, if somebody's trying to sneak into the fold, and then some people they it's obvious from the get-go, and it's just like, okay, calm down, it's all right, so it's like I know the people who would be my friend, whether or not The Hate You Give sold 1 copy or 1 million copies. I know who those people are, and I'm thankful for that.
Do you think that there's a quality that you could name that makes a really good friend?
I think a good quality for a friend is, I'd say, empathy. Empathy is a great quality for a friend, and I think it's something so often it feels like society lacks a lot of empathy as a whole, and I think it's a great thing to have, and people want to almost act as if empathy is a weakness, but it's not. What's wrong with taking the time to not only understand how someone else feels, but feel it yourself for a second? I think empathy is the purest form of understanding, and so it makes great friends. And that's not saying you have to have empathy every single time, but if you can at times, it helps. So I'd say that's one of the great qualities of a good friend.
Look at that, almost as if I planned it with the whole empathy ties.
See, you're so
Phenomenal.
simpatico.
I know, but I do think this actually does relate back to what I was talking about at the beginning with Empathy Lab and reading being a means of generating empathy, because quite honestly, of all of my closest friends, all of them are pretty avid readers, and I think that's something for me personally that's massively important, is someone who I can exchange ideas with, or number one, but also number two, I think that reading does help generate empathy and helps relate to people outside of your own situation, and I think that's obviously goes hand in hand with what Angie was saying about friendship.
You know, if empathy is putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, what else is reading apart from quite literally doing that? You're reading fiction. That's what that is.
The exposure that you get to different circumstances you wouldn't get anywhere else, because the narrative is so much stronger than even watching television, I think.
Yeah.
I'm reading An American Marriage at the moment. Again, something that I wouldn't normally go for, but the things that the plot line is kind of throwing up is really making me think about how would I feel about that, and what about if I was in that position. And it all links back to kind of finding those feelings that you wouldn't have anywhere else.
Yeah, I feel like I should also clarify that I'm not being paid by Empathy Lab in any way for plugging them so much in this episode.
Oh my god, I just think I was slightly sad, isn't it, that idea that you have to be wary after success of the people that come into your life, you know, that friendship becomes slightly different. I think that there is that thing where the friends that you make early on in your life do tend to be the ones that you can hold on to for much of your life. I think there's periods at school or at university or that sort of teenage period. I'm still friends with those people, even though we've all gone off and done our separate things, you know, but I just you pick up where you have left off, don't you, next time you speak to them. Actually, the next author we're going to hear from has got something to say about friendships and the tenuousness of them. We'll get to that in a moment. I should introduce him first. So we're going to hear from Tash Aw. He's a writer who has seen 2 of his 4 novels longlisted for the Man Booker Prize, and his latest, We the Survivors, is a taut examination of social inequality and murder in his native Malaysia. Now, Tash's multilingual childhood and an international adulthood, which now sees him living in London, have given him a very different view on friendship.
Friendship, to me, I think is, you know, it is the most precious and fragile thing to me, because I've moved countries and moved back to countries. The whole notion of friendship for me is not the same as that for someone who stayed in one country for all their life, or for most of their life. For me, friendship is something that has to be worked on in a much more active sense than I think for other people. And sometimes when I meet someone, I know I'm going to get along with them. I'm already filled with this sense of terror of thinking that I'm going to lose that friendship when I move to another country in a few years' time, because people will say that you can keep up friendships you have a long distance, but actually in reality it's really, really hard, and we all have a tendency to be close to people who are physically close to, geographically close to us. And so for me, friendship involves so many things. It involves a certain anxiety about loss. It involves an anxiety about losing touch with one's culture, with one's language. I was born with a certain set of languages, and I grew up speaking Chinese, Malay, and English. But I find that when I'm not in a country where it's easy for me to speak, say, Malay on an everyday basis, I do find myself losing that language, and then it becomes a fight to keep up what you consider is one of your native languages. And so, for me, a friendship is something that is fraught with the fear of losing it.
And you feel that at the outset, you feel that almost immediately. You're immediately worried about losing a friendship, even as it's just beginning.
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, I'm always thinking, this is something so wonderful, and how am I going to hang on to it? How am I going to be able to hang on to it? And I think that it's always, my friends are they're incredibly dear to me. I don't have very many close friends. I know a lot of people, obviously, but I'm not the number of people I would say I'm close to, who are really, really close friends. I mean, fewer than 5, and that's, I think, a function of having to move as a writer, and I've become moving. Being a migrant, being an immigrant is so much part of who I am, and so much part of who I am as a writer, that although I long not to do that, not to be like that anymore, I still feel compelled to be that. And friendship gets bound up in all those things. Friendship becomes something that is inseparable from the act of moving around, and in this case it means to me something that is always in peril. It's always something that I risk losing.
That small group of friends that you do have, what are the sort of qualities that they offer? What does that friendship mean to you?
I think that they too are people who are like me, who understand what it is to inhabit that space in between social structures, in between cultures, people who understand that actually if you're not in touch with someone for 2 or 3 months, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've forgotten them, and that it's just that you're busy trying to re-establish links with your family in another continent, or you're busy trying to establish yourself in a job. Writers these days we have to take teaching jobs. We have to we have to sort of go to other countries for our research, and so all this involves huge emotional effort. Ideally one wants to stay in one country, and put down roots in one community. I mean that idea is incredibly appealing, and I spend my whole time wanting to achieve that. But the fact is, it's very difficult these days for writers, and we have to, like a lot of people, writing is. I think society in general has this view that writing is this really glamorous job. It's really romantic. You have a garret flat somewhere and you just write when inspiration strikes you. But in fact, it's a job like any other. And the market being what it is nowadays, really, writing. I mean, as long as I can remember, I've always treated writing like a job. I've always treated it with the respect that other people have for their jobs. I turn up for work every day. I just do it. And other people have to get in their cars or take a train and commute for an hour and a half every day to get to work and back. And really that's what a lot of writers have to do these days as well in order to survive. And I guess friendship gets bound up in all of that. We're so busy trying to survive as writers. We're so busy trying to just keep afloat that sometimes friendships get lost in those moves.
So lots to unpack there.
So much.
Tash Aw is a fascinating man, and we spoke about lots of things. So I'm hoping he'll come back in another season of the podcast. But I was really intrigued by that idea of being scared of losing a friendship even as it's beginning, and how friendships require work.
Yeah, I feel like this is something Holly can touch on, seeing as half of her friends have moved to the other side of the world. Not as a result of their friendship with Holly, I would assume.
Well, it was interesting listening to him talking about the difficulties with maintaining long-distance relationships, because I think we're now in a point in society where it could be no easier. We kind of have these devices that are so easy to contact people, and for me, one of my Dan's going to laugh at this because he's spent the last year listening to me crying about it. One of my closest friends lives in Australia, another one lives out in Auckland, and my friend Taylor, who is out in Auckland, said recently when she moved that actually it made her realise who her true friends were, because those were the people that, despite that 13-hour time difference, would still get up early to speak to her or would stay up late to speak to her on the phone in the evenings. And we're at a point where it couldn't be easier. We can still send letters, we can still do the traditional things, but to be able to just send a text that is instantly delivered to somebody's pocket when they're on the other side of the world, Tash should not be worried.
But is there something about the fact that it is so easy that means that we don't do it? And in fact, if it requires effort, it means more.
I think I agree with you. I have a friend who lives in the States, and there was a period of like a year or so when we used to write to each other, like physically write. Yeah. And it was such a meaningful exchange of like just conversation. Yeah. But that at some point kind of died down, and we reverted to, like messaging on various platforms. And the conversation loses something in that. I don't know why, because obviously I message people who live in the country all the time, but like, I don't know, it's such an interesting...
I think there's something about the effort that's required to sit down and write a letter with your hand and put a stamp on it and post it and wait for it to arrive. I mean, the epistolary novel exists because that form of communication has meaning. And I can think of so many books I've read where whether it's a love affair or whether it's a friendship, that the nature of that relationship is entirely communicated through the effort that it requires to communicate with each other. And sending a few emojis to somebody doesn't have quite the same impact. But you're right. I mean, it should be easy to maintain friendships with almost anybody anywhere. But I don't know that means that it is easy.
I think this notion of friendship being something that you work on, which Tash brings up quite at the beginning of that clip, is true regardless of where you are in terms of proximity to one another. A book that came to mind when I was thinking about the topic of this week's podcast was Sheila Hetty's How Should a Person Be, which I don't know if either of you have read.
Yes, I have.
But it's just brilliant. But she touches on this idea of friendship being something about like mutual support or stimulation. So quite near the beginning of the book, she has this section where she says, one good thing about being a woman is that we haven't too many examples yet of what a genius looks like. It could be me. There is no ideal model for how my mind should be. For the men, it's pretty clear. That's the reason you see them trying to talk themselves up all the time, which I think is just a brilliant line. But the book is dedicated to her friend Margot. The novel follows a character called Sheila and her friend Margot. And it's therefore kind of like, I don't want to call it autofiction because the people who write said autofiction don't like the term autofiction, but it is like that kind of like autobiographical fiction. Yeah. But Sheila is constantly recording all of their conversations together, which feature in the book. And Margot, or maybe fictitious versions of them feature in the book, who knows. And Margot's constantly painting, particularly pictures of Sheila. And so you have this really like something that's worked on and like kind of supporting one another. So I think that's another example of that proximity, kind of friendship being a fuel.
Nice. Sold. Good work, Dan.
Yeah. The other thing that I thought was really interesting coming out of the Tash's bit there was this thing about the kind of regularity of contact and like kind of picking up the conversation where you left off, which is something that just rang so true. I'm currently reading Austerlitz by Siebold, and there's like these moments whenever the narrator bumps into Austerlitz, he describes it as like, and the conversation just continued from where we were 2 years ago. And like genuinely have my closest and dearest friend Finn, who I've known like my whole life, whenever I see them, it's just like, we're back. Like conversation begins again, Yeah.
Is it the same for you, Holly, with your friends on the other side of the world? It's
Absolutely.
just sort of...
Please, here is a photo of Taylor.
Oh! More.
Here is a photo of me and Taylor when we went to Australia last year together.
For all of you listeners at home.
more top pictorial content.
Of course. But yes, I would say it is, although we do message kind of every couple of days. So there is a sort of constant conversation happening. So we're not at a point where... And it's been the same for the last 13 years, I suppose, of friendship. We have always had that constant conversation.
There is that thing as well, isn't there?
It's lovely.
If it is a true friendship, that if you go away and you lose contact for whatever the reason is, it'll be because of life. It'll be because of whatever you're doing.
Of course.
And that your friends will never judge you for that gap, and they'll never ask you necessarily to explain where the hell have you been. They'll be there to be ready to listen to you when you're ready to tell them, whatever the reason is.
And also you can just like dispense with the shit of just like, oh hi, how's it going? Awkwardness. It's just like, what are you up to? Let's get down to this.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to travel back in time, because we can do that on a podcast. We're going to go back to the launch of Slay in Your Lane, the Black Girl Bible, which is by Yomi Adegoke and Elizabeth Uviebenene. Holly, you were actually at the launch, so can you tell us a little bit more?
Yes, they did an absolutely wonderful event at our Tottenham Court Road shop not too long ago. The atmosphere was really warm, it was funny, and when they were explaining where their ideas for the book came from, I was really struck by the strength of their friendship and how that had played such a strong role in making it happen. They just clearly have so much love for each other, so enjoy the snippet, it really comes through.
It started because Elizabeth asks quite a lot of me.
As your best friend.
Yeah, she really does. She's quite a demanding best friend. So she really is. Yeah. That's a record scratch, by the way, when she makes that noise. It does not sound like one. But essentially, as amazing as Elizabeth is, she knows what she wants. So one day she sort of called me sort of out of the blue. And was kind of like, I've been reading loads of books like Lean In and Thrive by Irena Huffington and Girl Boss by Sophia Amoruso, and because I'm trying to kill it at work, and I want to try and essentially, I guess she didn't say slay in her lane because it didn't exist then, but she was like, I want to kind of kill it in whatever I'm doing. And she was like, essentially there's an elephant in the room, because they're like, yeah, girl, as a girl, you've got to lean in, you've got to take up space. And when you're a black woman and you're doing that, it's like, whoa. People kind of like, can you take up a little bit less space? You're kind of scaring me, essentially. A lot of people kind of are quick to kind of write us off when we are trying to lean in and sort of be a bit more forthright and be a bit more confident. We kind of come across as angry or as having a chip on our shoulder, essentially. So Elizabeth called me at lunchtime, literally I'm at home. Was I at home? Was I working?
No, you're working. It was a lunchtime.
So we must have both been in our respective toilets at work. And I was at Viewpoint. So no one's ever heard of Viewpoint. It was supposed to be a... how do I put it? A BuzzFeed rival that nobody is yet to have heard of. Because it didn't rival BuzzFeed. I was working there, which was my first job post-university. Elizabeth was working in Canary Wharf as a marketing manager.
No, this before I got my promotion.
Oh,
marketing officer.
Look at how seamlessly. You guys didn't even need to know that. And yet she's like, so my promotion. But yeah, no, she did get promoted because she's brilliant at what she does, so fair enough. But yeah, so she called me and was like, where are the books that speak to black girls? And I was like, I don't know. I don't read I was about to say I don't read, which is not true because I do read, but I don't read as much as I should. So I was like, I don't read. So I certainly didn't read self-help books or books that were to guide you, I suppose. Not because I don't know. It was kind of to be honest, from a place of arrogance, because I was like, I've got it. You don't see yourself reflected in a white woman in with shoulder pads with her hands on her hips being like, you can do it. And it's like, which you are you talking about, essentially? So Elizabeth rang me and was like, I really wish there was on a level a book that spoke to black women about the workplace. And literally her words were, oh, you're a journalist, can you write this book? That was pretty much the start of the conversation. And I was like, you kind of have this little light bulb moment, because she was kind of just talking about this idea, and I was like, this is genuinely very good. So as she was kind of talking, I was kind of Googling okay, this is one of those ideas that's so good. Obviously, there's probably this African-American entrepreneur that's already got a book called Slaying Your Line, and it's all about the exact same thing. So I was like, oh, let's have a look, whatever. And then it didn't exist. So she was like, oh, can you write it for me? And I was like, she got promoted for a reason. She's a marketing genius. So I was like, why don't we, journalist, marketing, let's make it happen. Let's do it together. And that's essentially how it was born, literally from a phone call where I guess she was just frustrated with the books that were sort of out there and wanted to make sure that she could see herself reflected. And then it became about making sure that other black women felt reflected as well.
Yeah, would you say it saved our friendship? Because if you
saved,
remember,
what was wrong with it?
Remember, you always said no. Remember, you would say that if you done it by yourself,
yes,
and went to make loads of money.
Yeah. I said that, yeah, because I said that I could see the pound signs already. So I was like, if I run off and basically it's just me in an alternate reality, me alone on stage, then Elizabeth in the audience looking at me like, this is my idea. So yeah, so it became, let's do it together.
And I think it allowed us to be vulnerable as well. There are things in this book that even apart from ourselves, our other closest friends probably don't even know. So I think even just talking about certain aspects of our childhood, certain aspects of just stuff that's happened over the last how many years in our personal lives, we've been able to kind of, I guess, make sure, if it was just one person, it would be really scary to kind of put yourself out there. But because it was two of us, we were able to kind of be like, oh, do we do this? Do we put this in there? And I think because we kind of worked out reason to ourselves that it would help people, it kind of became a higher purpose, that it just wasn't about us. And I think after we started writing this book and uncovering so many stats, a lot of it was shocking, and some things you know, but to actually see it in percentages, I think it very soon after we realized, oh my god, this book actually has to be good, and it has to make a splash, and it, not just because it's the first, but because it's an actual good book, and we, in terms of the research and all of that sort of stuff, but even the personal stories of the women and everything like that, that allowed us to kind of do it because we were doing it together. Because first off, the first chapter that we ever did, so with our agent and everything, it wasn't about us. It was so not personal whatsoever. So when she read it, she was like, this is all right, but in order for it to be really good and great, we need more of you and more of your voices. And it took us aback. And obviously Yomi's a journalist, But she doesn't write about her personal stuff in her work. And me being just like, my own life, it's not something that I do. So it took a lot of mental kind of like strength to kind of think, oh gosh, do I put this in there? And I guess the friendship does help.
I love those two.
They're fantastic.
That chemistry is...
Can we listen to them forever?
I mean, you can just, not only their clear love for each other, but also the atmosphere in the room. Like, you can see all of the audience at that event clearly loving the idea of that book, being the right audience for that book, and really loving hearing the two of them talk about its genesis, how it came to be. I think it's something really interesting about friendship, which is that not only do you get the support from your friends, and you tend to get that from your family as well, that kind of blind support, like whatever you do, I'll always be there for you. But you also get that kind of keen criticism or interest or whatever. The thing that actually helps you to do things often is your friends, who will say the thing that you need to hear sometimes. And those two clearly bolstering each other to make sure that book was as good as it could possibly be. And also to share those things that they were slightly scared about sharing.
I just loved how throughout that clip they just kind of were really promoting each other through kind of saying, you're an amazing journalist and you will do this and you will do that. It's just lovely to hear that support. We need it.
Whilst also slightly taking the piss out of each other as well.
Absolutely.
To kind of continue on that idea of kind of support, criticism, being vulnerable, etc., etc. I think that no episode on friendship would be complete without me mentioning Ferrante at least once.
Here we go. I thought it was going to be about me.
No, without me mentioning Holly. No, without me mentioning Ferrante. There was a really interesting, I can't remember, it's like the New Yorker or the New York Times. There's this really interesting idea where they run this piece where they ask an architect to render a novel as a building. So they say the architect reads the book and then draws up a sketch of a building that kind of somehow represents the book. Okay, so not a building from the book, but a building that is the book. Yeah, that they've devised and come up with. It's a brilliant thing. But they did one for My Brilliant Friend, the first in the Neapolitan novels. And I'm going to have to describe it because obviously it's a visual thing. But it's essentially this kind of building which is kind of intermingling and kind of almost looking like cells or something, or like DNA strands. And the building at once looks like it's being supported by two halves and then two halves pulling away from one another at the same time. If you can visualize this. Any listeners, look it up. It's brilliant. Especially if you've read the books. But it's this really interesting idea of this mutually supporting thing, the friendship of Lido and Lenu being supportive, but also somehow needing to kind of pull apart or critique one another. And it's I would highly recommend looking it up.
I would never have thought we'd have got to architecture.
I know.
Talking about friendship.
Who'd have thought?
Who'd have thunk
so
it?
relevant. The other thing that I think that comes up in that is this line between friendship and community that came up with Slay in Your Lane.
I think it was really interesting what they were saying about the books that already existed, those kind of business self-help books really didn't speak to them, and also that there's a different message if you're a black woman, that there's a different feeling that goes along with any kind of confidence building or asserting yourself at work, because it's not a level playing field.
No.
And so there was definitely a need for that book, and you can hear that in the room, because you can hear that all of those people finally have got the guidance or the support that they needed from Yomi and Elizabeth.
It came up in Angie's clip as well, when she said about having close friends, etc., to support her within the industry. And it's definitely this thing of finding identifiable role models or friendships to cope with the strain of capitalism. Rampant lefty Dan coming through. Genuinely, like, that, having those models or people you can relate to on that level is just so important for coping. Definitely. Mutually coping.
Now, before I tell you more about what to expect from next week's episode, it is time to travel the country and hear from our booksellers with their recommendations based on this theme of friendship. Get ready to make notes, and remember that whatever you're looking for, it always pays to ask a bookseller.
Hi, I'm Alison from Bury St Edmunds, and a great book to read about the theme friendship will be The Lido by Libby Page, because it's a heartwarming exploration of how a community comes together to save their local swimming pool, uniting to protect something they love and forming lifelong companionships across the generations in the process.
Hi, I'm Steve from Swansea, and a great book to read about friendship is Release by Patrick Ness, because the friendship between his two young protagonists feels genuine, tender and loving. His characters always feel real, and their relationships utterly believable.
Hi, my name is Paul, I work at the Brentwood store, and I think that a great book to read on the theme of friendship would be The Watchmaker of Filigree by Tash Aw. She writes these wonderful, fantastical worlds that you wish were true, but at the very heart of it, there is a relationship between Nathaniel and Maury that is so strong and enchanting that you love spending time in their company, and it just keeps you turning the pages.
We have learned that friendship is precious. We've learned that it requires effort. And also, I suppose, that it can help you to do things that you might not have been able to do on your own, definitely.
And can be a building, apparently, as
and
well.
And can also be a building. Holly and Dan, my friends, thank you for the chat as ever. We obviously hope that you enjoyed this episode. We would love to hear your thoughts. So you can email us on social@waterstones.com, and do, of course, please leave reviews and ratings on your podcast platform of choice. And if you're enjoying the series so far, tell your friends.
How many mention of friends can you get?
I think I'm done now.
Waterstones podcast drinking game.
We can move on to what to expect from our next episode. So we're going to be changing the tone ever so slightly. It's not so much friends as friends with benefits, because we're going to be talking about sex. Yes.
I'm afraid I'd just like to clarify that is not the nature of the relationship between the podcasts.
It's not the vibe in this room. So we'll be talking about sex with Hannah Witten, Caitlin Moran and Candice Carty-Williams. So do please join us in a fortnight. And until then, bye from all of us here.
Bye.
Goodbye. But also, you always thank us, but we never thank you. Will? Thanks.
Thank you, Will. He also described us as his friend twice, and we didn't describe him as our friend once.
It's very, very telling.
Sound engineer.